Recently, Nate Silver delved into what would happen in a general election. Now, he's not a fan of general election polls, especially this early on in the election cycle, but he did want to figure out whether or not Donald Trump would be popular or unpopular when it comes to general election voters. Now, there have been polls in the past indicating that Donald Trump actually wouldn't do so well when it comes to the general election, but some of Nate Silver's findings are interesting to say the least. So let's go to what he found. Trump is extraordinarily unpopular with independent voters and Democrats. Gallup polling conducted over the past 6 weeks found that Trump, with a negative 27% point net favorability rating among independent voters and a negative 70 point net rating among Democrats. Favorability ratings can vary quite a bit from pollster to pollster, however, so I went back and collected a broader array of data. Specifically, I took an average of each candidate's favorability ratings in polls from the Huffington Post pollster database since November 1st. Okay, so now you know what his methodology is. His findings are awesome, and this makes me want him to win the Republican ticket.
Nate Silver?
No.
I guess he's a good guy.
Donald Trump is so unpopular with Democrats that I'm expecting Al Gore to choose him for his vice presidential running mate.
I get that.
So let's take a quick look at the polls, and you can see the net favorable figure. And at the very bottom is Donald Trump. Ben Carson actually breaks even. Marco Rubio -1, Ted Cruz -7. Same with John Kasich. Carly Fiorina's at -8. And then all the way at the bottom, you have Donald Trump at -25.
There's a couple amazing things there. I mean, one that Jeb Bush is so disliked.
Yes.
Probably largely based on the name, I think. I don't think people have that much.
Come on.
That's what I'm saying, America. Give him a break. Give him a break. Carly Fiorina not doing too bad. I think that's partially because most people still don't really know who she is.
Right.
There's 40% of Americans who haven't answered that. Kasich, understandably doing well. What I love about this is Donald Trump has been going out after the last Republican debate and saying, well, once you get to know Ted Cruz, you don't like him anymore. Well, motherfucker, he's got 18 points on you, and we've seen him for years, and I immediately knew I didn't like him, but he's still more likable than you. Ben Carson, it's hard to hate him, man, when he's sleeping. He just looks cute. He just wants to stroke his head.
He doesn't pose a threat. I mean, I think Ben Carson has been really good at laying low and making his money off this campaign, and that's really all he cares about.
Yeah.
You know, even when he was surging in the polls and he was in second place, he didn't really take it seriously, right?
Yeah.
And also his campaign consisted of him bragging about the fact that he tried to stab someone when he was younger.
That was the nicest thing he'd ever done.
It's amazing.
And I think that this lends a little bit more support to what I was saying after the Republican debate. Donald Trump being first among Republicans does not mean that his tactics are totally working. Republicans still despise him.
Yeah.
It is a factor of he has a lot of name recognition. He has enough people who like him, the plurality perhaps. Well, they had independents and they had Republicans as well. If you look overall, he's still disliked. And he's in a race with a bunch of other people who are splitting the votes. If they were to combine into one, like a Ted Cruz would be winning, and he'd be more likable while doing so.
Right. So let's go ahead and look at Democrats and their favorability rating. I think this is also interesting.
Now, let me ask you a question on this poll.
Sure.
This poll, is it favorability overall, general electorate, or is it just the Democrats?
No, general electorate.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Good.
Okay, so let's look at Democrats. I love this because Bernie Sanders is literally the only candidate running for president right now in both the Democratic and Republican parties that's at a positive favorability rating.
The only reason they're saying that it's favorable is that they're so terrified of him being a socialist, they're worried what he'll do to them.
That's exactly right.
Exactly. Yeah. I love this. And look, here's the thing. Notice that it's not just +3 and -8. Look at what those numbers add up to. Hillary Clinton has been around so long, 92% of all Americans already have an opinion about her that they've probably held for an average of a decade. Bernie Sanders still has 2 out of 10 Americans that he could potentially sway, and he's already doing an amazing job of it.
That's getting me so excited. It really is.
Yeah. I mean, if, people say that, even if Bernie gets elected, he's still going to have a Republican Congress. He is going to be FDR. He is going to get shit done. He is going to be able to use the bully pulpit. He is going to welcome their hate from Wall Street. He is not going to try to make nice with people. He is not going to start negotiating from the middle of his opponent's position and then work farther right. He is not going to do any of that stuff. He is going to do it the right way, and because he's got a track record, so I feel much more comfortable saying, or confident saying it this time than I did when I said about Barack Obama.
I know. I was thinking about that yesterday. I mean, the passion that I feel for Bernie Sanders is pretty similar to how I felt when Obama was running in 2008. And I just hope that I don't look like a fool.
Me too.
Again.
I know.
Well, we have a little bit more evidence about Bernie Sanders than we did
we
about
do.
with him. But to add on to what I was saying about people already knowing as much as they need to know about Hillary Clinton, and look, she's still doing very well. Like, she's generally unfavorable, but she has a lot of fans. Donald Trump is also at 91% of America already has a very good idea of what he's like, and they don't like it. Those are two candidates, one on the Republican side, one on the Democratic side, that people already know all this shit. Bernie Sanders, they've been seeing him for 6 months, and they like what they see, but there's still room for more people to be exposed to him.